Clint Eastwood parked his old Ford pickup in the dusty lot in front of the Golden West Hotel in the small town of Bakersfield, California. Jack Kelly had invited him to the annual Veterans Reunion. Jack insisted Clint stay at his new hotel, which he had recently bought and renovated. "This place is for real folks, Clint," Jack had said over the phone in his raspy voice. "No fancy stuff, just warm meals and clean beds. You'll like it." Clint, now 94, appreciated simplicity. He agreed without hesitation. He walked into the hotel lobby, holding a small, worn-out bag. The wooden floor creaked beneath his weight, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and pine-scented cleaner. Behind the counter stood a young woman, around 25, with a name tag that read Emily. Her blonde hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her dark green uniform shirt, with the hotel's logo, looked a bit wrinkled after a long day. She looked up from her phone and froze, eyeing Clint from head to toe. "Sorry, sir," she said, her voice polite but cold. "We don't have any vacancies." Clint frowned, his gray eyes narrowing. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his silver hair. "I think you're mistaken," he replied calmly, but with that familiar edge of firmness that had been in his voice since the days of Dirty Harry. "My friend Jack Kelly, the owner of this place, said I had a room booked." Emily glanced at him, her lips tightening into a thin line. She tapped the keyboard, but her eyes flicked again to his dusty clothes. Clint noticed her nose wrinkle slightly, maybe from the smell of sweat and road dust lingering after a long drive. "I don't see any reservation under the name Clint," she said, this time with clear irritation. "And even if there was, we can't accept guests who show up like this. We have standards." He stood silently, feeling a familiar warmth rise in his chest, not anger, but something closer to disappointment. Behind him, the door opened, and in walked a man in a business suit, carrying a Louis Vuitton suitcase. Emily instantly shifted her attention to him, her face lighting up with a friendly smile. "Welcome to the Golden West. How can I help you?" she said, her tone as warm as a summer day. Clint cleared his throat, drawing her attention back. "So you're saying I'm not welcome here?" he asked, his voice dropping lower, almost threatening, yet still controlled. Emily turned back to him, her smile gone. "Look, sir, I don't want trouble. But just look at yourself. You look like you've been digging ditches. We can't allow you to stay here. This is a private establishment, and we have the right to refuse service." He felt his jaw tighten, but didn't rush to respond. The lobby fell quiet, with only the hum of the air conditioner and muffled voices from the nearby restaurant. Clint set his bag down on the floor and slowly pulled his phone from his pocket. He dialed Jack's number. "Jack, it's me," he said, locking eyes with Emily. "I'm at your hotel, but it seems I'm not exactly welcome." Emily rolled her eyes, clearly thinking it was a bluff. But a moment later, her expression changed. She heard Jack's familiar voice through the phone, though she couldn't make out the words. Clint listened silently, nodding, then handed the phone to her. "He wants to talk to you," he said evenly. Emily reluctantly took the phone, her fingers trembling slightly. She held it to her ear, and Clint saw her eyes widen. "Yes, Mr. Kelly. I understand. But yes, I see. I'm sorry, I didn't know." Her voice grew quieter and her face paler with every word. She handed the phone back to Clint, avoiding his gaze. "You can stay," she mumbled. "I'll find you a room." "Thank you," Clint replied, but his tone held neither triumph nor anger, only calm certainty. He picked up his bag and followed her to the front desk, feeling the tension in the air slowly fade. But this was only the beginning. At a nearby table in the lobby sat a man in his 60s, with a gray beard and a faded baseball cap bearing the Vietnam Veterans logo. He'd been watching the scene, sipping coffee from a paper cup. His name was Tom Harris, and he was one of the veterans attending the reunion. Tom leaned toward his wife, Marge, and whispered, "Something tells me that old guy in the coat isn't just a farmer. And I wouldn't be surprised if the whole town's buzzing about this tomorrow." Marge, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose, glanced at Clint over her newspaper. If he really knows Jack, this could get interesting, she said quietly. But why kick him out over his clothes? These days, that just feels unfair. Tom grunted. Unfair? This is America 2025, sweetheart. It's all about how you look, not who you are. But I've got a feeling that guy's not the type to just swallow an insult. Clint, meanwhile, had been handed a room key, a classic metal key with a plastic tag labeled 214. He gave one last glance at Emily, who still avoided his eyes, and headed for the stairs. But a plan was already forming in his mind. He had no intention of causing a scene or demanding an apology. No, Clint Eastwood knew a better way, the kind that didn't require yelling, just conversation. And he was ready to show this town that even at 94, an old cowboy could still change the rules of the game. Clint Eastwood climbed the creaky wooden stairs to the second floor of the Golden West Hotel. The hallway was narrow, with a worn-out beet-colored carpet and dim lights casting a soft glow on cream-painted walls. The air smelled of old wood and a faint lavender scent, probably from a freshener someone had sprayed to mask the mustiness. He reached room 214, inserted the key into the lock, and turned it with a soft click. The door opened, revealing a small but clean room, a bed with a faded cover, a small TV on a dresser, and a window overlooking the parking lot. It was already dark outside, and only the flickering highway lights reminded him there was still life beyond. Clint dropped his bag onto the bed and sat down, pulling off his boots. His joints ached after the long drive, but his mind remained sharp as ever. The scene in the lobby kept replaying in his head. Emily, her cold stare, her talk about standards, it wasn't just rudeness. It was a symptom of something deeper, and Clint knew it. Jack Kelly, his old army buddy, had often said how hard it was to keep a business afloat these days. Taxes crushing you, staff changing monthly, customers demanding more for less. But Jack always said his hotel was meant for people, not for show. So what had gone wrong? He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. His pickup sat there like a silent witness, next to a couple of sleek sedans, probably guests in suits, the kind Emily had greeted with open arms. Clint let out a quiet huff. All his life, he'd fought against prejudice, whether in Hollywood, where they said he was too rough for lead roles, or in the Army, where younger officers looked down on him for his plain demeanor. And now, in 2025, it was still the same, appearance over substance. A muffled noise drifted up from below, raised voices in a tense argument. Clint leaned closer to the window, but the sound wasn't coming from the street. It was inside the hotel. He opened his door and listened. The voices came from a utility room at the end of the hallway, likely the staff room. One voice was sharp and commanding, the other quiet but strained. Clint moved toward it, his boots barely making a sound on the carpet. The door was ajar, and he peeked inside. Emily stood with her arms crossed, facing a man in his 40s wearing the same green hotel uniform, but with a name tag that read Manager, Roy. His face was red with anger, and he held a tablet like a weapon. "You couldn't just say we were full," Roy snapped. "Now Jack's calling me, chewing me out over some old guy in a dirty coat." Emily looked away, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. He said he knew Jack. "I didn't think he was bluffing," she replied quietly. "Knows Jack? Half the people in this town say they know Jack." Roy slammed the tablet onto a table. "You know the rules. If they look homeless, we don't let them in. Customers complain when they see people like that in the lobby. And now I have to explain this to the boss because of you." Clint stood in the corridor shadows, listening. His brow furrowed, but he didn't move. Beside Roy stood another employee, a slim young woman with dark hair. Her name tag read Sarah. She held a mop and remained silent, but her eyes burned with indignation. "That's not fair, Roy," she finally said, her voice trembling. "He didn't look homeless, just like an old man who came a long way. And you said we're supposed to be welcoming." Roy spun toward her. "Welcoming? You want this hotel to become a shelter? We barely have money for repairs, and you think we should let in anyone who smells like gas and dust. Sarah gripped the mop tighter. Maybe if you didn't spend half the budget on your so-called bonuses, we wouldn't have to pinch every penny, she blurted out. Roy froze, his eyes narrowing. Watch your mouth, Sarah. You clean floors, you don't run the place. One more word, and you're out of here. Clint decided it was time to step in. He cleared his throat and stepped into the doorway. All three turned to him, and silence fell. Roy frowned, Emily stepped back, and Sarah's eyes widened. Sorry to interrupt, Clint said calmly, his voice low and even. But I couldn't help overhearing, you're talking about me. Roy recovered quickly. This is a private conversation. Sir, you should return to your room. Clint smiled, just slightly, but with that trademark irony that made his smile famous. I would gladly. But it seems you're deciding who's allowed to stay in this hotel. And I'm not sure I like your criteria. Roy scoffed. Listen, old man, I don't know what you told Jack, but I'm the manager here. I decide who meets our standards. Clint nodded slowly, as if considering Roy's words. Then he took out his phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. The room filled with ringing, then the familiar raspy voice of Jack Kelly. Clint, you settled in yet? How's the room? It's great, Jack, Clint replied, locking eyes with Roy. But your staff here seems to have questions about me. Maybe you could explain who I am. Jack laughed, the sound broken by a cough. Who you are? Hell, you're Clint Eastwood, my old friend, and the guy who put up half the money when I bought that damn hotel. Don't they know that? The room fell dead silent. Roy turned pale, his mouth slightly open. Emily covered her face with her hand, and Sarah dropped her mop with a clatter. Apparently not, Clint said dryly, ending the call. He looked at Roy. So, do I still not meet your standards? Roy swallowed hard, his confidence melting like snow in the California sun. I didn't know, sir, I'm sorry. We thought. You thought I was just some old man in a dirty coat, Clint interrupted, his voice firm now. And I wouldn't mind if you didn't treat everyone else the same way unless they're wearing a $1,000 suit. Sarah suddenly smiled, her eyes lighting up. You're really the Clint Eastwood? The one who directed Unforgiven? My grandpa loved your movies. Clint nodded, his gaze softening. Yes, that one. But I'm not here as an actor. I'm here to find out what's happening at the hotel I helped build. Roy tried to speak, but Clint raised a hand, stopping him. I'll talk to Jack tomorrow, and with all of you. But tonight I want you to think about one thing. This hotel isn't about standards. It's about people. And if you don't get that, maybe this isn't the right place for you. He turned and walked back to his room, leaving the trio in stunned silence. But around the corner in the hallway stood Tom Harris, the veteran from the lobby, who had heard everything. He smiled to himself and whispered, Well, I'll be damned. That old cowboy's still got it. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of room 214, casting golden stripes on the wooden floor. Clint Eastwood woke up early, as always, a habit that had stayed with him since his army days. He washed his face with cold water from the small sink, ran a hand over his gray stubble, and put on a clean shirt, but kept the same worn trench coat. Today, he wasn't planning to hide or prove anything by force. Today, he wanted to talk. In the lobby of a Golden West hotel, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and hot pancakes from the restaurant was already in the air. A few guests, mostly elderly people who had come for a veterans reunion, sat at tables, chatting quietly. Clint came down the stairs, his boots creaking again, but this time no one shot him a sideways glance. Emily stood behind the front desk, her face pale, nervously shuffling papers. When she saw him, she froze. Good morning, Clint said, stopping in front of her. His voice was calm, but carried weight. Good morning, Mr. Eastwood, she replied quietly, lowering her eyes. I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't know who you were. Clint shook his head. I don't need an apology for not being recognized. But I do want to know why you decided I didn't belong here. Emily sighed, her shoulders slumping. Roy always says we have to cater to the right customers. The ones who pay more, the ones who look, well, richer. He says that's the only way to stay afloat. And do you agree with that? Clint asked, his gray eyes watching her closely. She hesitated, then shook her head. No, but I'm afraid of losing my job. I have 2 kids, and I'm raising them alone. Roy doesn't tolerate anyone challenging him. Clint nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. He was about to say something when the restaurant doors opened and Sarah walked out, holding a rag and a bucket. Her dark hair was tied back, and her expression was determined. Seeing Clint, she stepped closer. "Are you really a co-owner?" she asked without preamble. "Because if you are, then a lot needs to change around here." "I'm listening," Clint replied, sitting down on one of the lobby chairs. He gestured for her to sit, but Sarah remained standing. "Roy runs this place like a tyrant," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "We work 10-hour shifts without breaks. He cuts our hours when he feels like it, and then blames us if guests complain. Half the staff has quit in the last 6 months. And he lies to Jack, says everything's fine." Emily nodded, confirming her words. "He even told us not to let in people who don't fit," she added. "Like you yesterday." Clint listened silently, his face unreadable, but a spark lit in his eyes, the same one that appeared before a decisive shot in his old westerns. But this time, he wasn't here to shoot. He stood and turned to Emily. "Call Roy. And everyone on shift. We'll meet in the restaurant in 10 minutes." Emily nodded and hurried off. Sarah looked at Clint with curiosity. "Are you going to fire him?" she asked. "We'll see," Clint replied, his voice mysterious. "But first, I want him to hear me." 10 minutes later, the hotel restaurant was full. Seated at tables were not only staff, Sarah, Emily, 2 cooks, and a janitor, but also several guests, including Tom Harris and his wife Marge. Roy entered last, his face tense, fists clenched. He stopped in front of Clint, trying to maintain confidence. "What's this meeting about?" he grumbled. "We've got work to do." "Sit down, Roy," Clint said, pointing to a chair. His tone allowed no argument. Roy reluctantly sat. Clint remained standing, looking over everyone. The restaurant smelled of sizzling bacon and syrup, and the sound of a frying pan hissed from the kitchen. Outside, cars roared down the highway, but inside it was silent. "I didn't come here to teach anyone," Clint began, his voice low and measured. "But yesterday, I realized that this hotel, the one I invested my money and trust in, has become something else. And that's not Jack's fault. That's your fault, Roy." Roy frowned, but Clint raised a hand to stop him. "You think pleasing the rich is the path to success. But let me tell you what I've seen in life. The rich come and go. The real people, the ones who work, who struggle, who wear dirty clothes because they've been on their feet all day, they stay. And if you push them away, you lose everything." He turned to Sarah and Emily. "You're afraid of him, but you keep this place alive. Without you, there is no hotel. And I want you to know that." Sarah smiled, and Emily let out a sigh of relief. Roy tried to stand. "If you think you can just come in here and change everything." "I don't think," Clint interrupted. "I know. And here's what's going to happen. You'll stay on as manager, Roy, but under one condition. You listen to them," he nodded at the staff. "They'll tell you what needs to change. And if I hear you're putting yourself above others again, I'll come back. And then we'll have a very different conversation." Roy clenched his jaw but nodded. He knew arguing was pointless. Clint turned to everyone. "Now tell me what you need to make this place what Jack intended." Sarah spoke first. "We need breaks. And normal shifts, not 12-hour ones." "And repairs in the rooms," added Emily. "Guests are complaining about leaks." One of the cooks, an older man named Juan, raised his hand. "A new stove. The old one breaks down every week." Clint listened, nodding. Then he took out his phone and dialed Jack. "Jack, I'm here with your people. They know what needs fixing. I'll send you a list, and we'll get it done. Also, Roy's staying, but he's on probation now." Jack laughed on the other end. "You always know how to straighten things out, Clint." "Thank you." Clint hung up and looked at everyone. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning. You're not just employees, you're part of this place. And I want you to remember that." When he finished, the restaurant erupted in applause. Sarah jumped and hugged Emily. Juan smiled, and Tom Harris, sitting at a table, raised his coffee cup in salute. Even Roy, though clearly displeased, couldn't deny the change in atmosphere. For the first time in a long while, the Golden West smelled not only of coffee, but of hope. Clint walked out to the parking lot, where his pickup truck waited. He hadn't said everything he could have, hadn't told them how he'd once stood in their place, fighting against those who judged him by appearance or background. But he knew they'd understand with time. The sun had risen higher. He got into the truck, casting one last glance at the hotel. The doors opened, and Sarah ran out, holding a paper cup of coffee. "This is for you," she said, handing it over. "Thank you for not giving up." Clint took the coffee and smiled, this time genuinely. "I never give up," he said, "and neither should you." He started the engine and drove off, leaving behind a cloud of dust, and the feeling that something had changed. At the Golden West, people had started talking not just about what had happened, but about what could be.